Welcome to the Philosophical Odysseys podcast. We're jumping straight into the deep end today.
Oh, definitely are.
Yeah, we are taking a deep dive into an incredibly comprehensive philosophical text, and specifically looking at a concept that is, frankly, going to fundamentally dismantle your perception of the universe.
Right. It's a big one.
And I'm speaking directly to you right now, the listener, the learner who clicked play on this deep dive. Because our mission today is to systematically deconstruct everything you think you know about reality.
Which is, no small task.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. Are you actually sitting where you think you are sitting right now? Are you actually listening to my voice through headphones or speakers? Or is your entire existence, literally everything you consider your life, a complete and total unbroken illusion?
It sounds like hyperbole, setting the stakes that high right out of the gate.
It really does.
But this is exactly what rigorous epistemology is built for. I mean, philosophy is often unfairly caricatured by people who picture detached scholars living in ivory towers.
Right, yeah.
Just completely disconnected from the real world, endlessly debating abstract nonsense.
I'll admit, the stereotype of the guy in the tweed jacket, just staring at a brick wall for 10 hours thinking about the concept of a chair, is pretty pervasive.
It is, yeah. But historically, philosophy dealt with ideas that were considered so incredibly dangerous to the fabric of society that thinkers like René Descartes, Baruch Spinoza, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau were threatened with excommunication.
Wow.
Yeah, their books were systematically banned and burned. They were denied promotions, forced into hiding, or sent into exile.
That's intense.
And the most famous historical example is the state of Athens executing Socrates by forcing him to drink hemlock.
Right, simply because they viewed his relentless questioning of reality and morality as a literal plague corrupting the youth.
Exactly, because, think about it, science can tell us what we physically and technologically can do.
Like mapping the genome or making genetically modified foods.
Right, or developing artificial intelligence. But science doesn't possess the inherent vocabulary to tell us what we should do, or more fundamentally, what is actually real in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this. And to do that, we really need to introduce the primary focus of today's deep dive.
The big thought experiment.
Yeah, the infamous brain in a vat thought experiment. And I want you, the listener, to really visualize this with us. I want you to paint a visceral, uncomfortable picture in your mind right now.
It's quite a dark scenario.
It is. Imagine an evil, monster-hearted scientist. And this completely malevolent genius hasn't just kidnapped you. They have systematically, surgically removed your physical brain from your skull.
Just isolated the brain completely.
Right. Your body, your history, your life as you know it is gone.
The physical isolation of the self is a truly gruesome but necessary starting point for this thought experiment.
And the scenario gets so much darker, unfortunately. This scientist has placed your disembodied wet brain into a vat.
A literal jar.
A jar filled with this perfectly temperature-controlled, nutrient-rich synthetic liquid that keeps your brain tissue perfectly alive and functioning indefinitely.
So you're alive, but you have no body.
Exactly. And then, the scientist takes all of your severed nerve endings, millions of them, and meticulously splices them into the hardware of a supercomputer.
And we are talking about the ultimate, most advanced computational machine imaginable.
Right. A machine whose sole architectural purpose is the generation of a flawless simulation.
Flawless is the key word here.
Yes, because this computer feeds your biological brain perfect, seamless electronic signals. Everything you currently see, hear, taste, touch, and smell is nothing more than an electrical impulse being fed directly into your cerebral cortex.
Every single sensory input?
Everything. The chair you feel beneath you right now, just a line of code translating into an electrical impulse. This deep dive you were listening to, a fabricated audio file injected into your auditory processing center.
It's all fake.
The sky outside your window and the feeling of your own hands when you look down at them, it's all part of the illusion. It is a complete, unyielding sensory hijack.
It really makes you uncomfortable just thinking about it.
So I have to ask you, if everything feels exactly the same, if the simulation is absolutely without error, how can you prove to me with absolute certainty that you aren't floating in that vat right now?
You can't. And the profound discomfort that question causes is exactly why it is the ultimate tool for epistemology.
Which is the branch of philosophy dedicated to the study of knowledge, right?
Exactly. Epistemology asks the foundational questions. Like, what do we actually know? How do we know it? And what are the absolute unshakable conditions required for us to legitimately claim that we possess true knowledge?
And the brain in a vat scenario forces a pretty devastating admission.
It does, because if it is even logically possible that you are in the vat, then every single thing you claim to know about the external physical world could be completely false.
Wow.
It undermines the very bedrock of human confidence.
It feels like pulling the absolute bottom block out of a Jenga tower. Like the whole structure of reality just collapses.
It really does.
But, this brain in a vat concept feels incredibly modern to me. When I read through our sources, my mind instantly went to Silicon Valley, tech-heavy anxieties, supercomputers, Neuralinks, that kind of thing.
That's a very common reaction.
But the text points out that this is actually a centuries-old anxiety, just kind of dressed up in modern clothing.
That is a crucial context to have. The modern vat scenario with the electrodes and the nutrient fluid was formalized and popularized by the American philosopher Hilary Putnam.
Okay.
This was in his 1981 work, Reason, Truth, and History. But Putnam was entirely transparent that he didn't invent the core epistemological terror here.
He just updated it.
Exactly. He was updating a 17th century nightmare engineered by the French philosopher René Descartes in his 1641 text, Meditations on First Philosophy.
I always pictured Descartes as this deeply cynical, almost paranoid guy. Sitting in a dark room by a stove, distrusting everyone, assuming the universe is inherently deceptive and out to get him.
A lot of people picture him that way.
It just feels like a depressive spiral of someone who completely gave up on trusting reality.
It is easy to read him that way, especially when you look at the specific thought experiments he designed, but his underlying motivation was actually the complete opposite.
Really?
Yeah, Descartes was operating in an era of massive scientific and philosophical upheaval. The old medieval scholastic systems were failing.
So he was trying to fix it.
Right. He wasn't a cynic. He was an epistemological architect looking for permanence. He employed what we call the method of doubt, and his goal was profoundly optimistic.
Okay, I see.
He wanted to rebuild the entire temple of human knowledge on a completely unshakable, permanent foundation. But to find that absolute bedrock, he first had to deploy a bulldozer.
He had to clear the site first.
Exactly. He decided to intentionally throw out any belief, any piece of knowledge that harbored even the microscopic shadow of uncertainty. If a belief could be doubted, even a little bit, it was discarded.
And since our senses demonstrably lie to us, the senses were the first thing to go into the garbage bin.
Right.
Which is a fascinating parallel to how this concept manifests for the modern audience today. Because an informed listener hears the phrase simulated reality and immediately thinks of The Matrix.
Oh, of course. 1999.
Yeah, and we don't need to rehash the plot of the movie. We all know Keanu Reeves wakes up from a simulated 1999 America to find human bodies floating in liquid pods.
Being used as biological batteries by a malicious cyber intelligence.
Right. It's essentially the brain in a vat blown up to a $60 million Hollywood blockbuster.
It really is.
But I've always wondered why highly intelligent, rational audiences accepted the premise of The Matrix so instinctively. Like, it terrified us, but it didn't feel entirely ridiculous.
No, well, why do you think that is?
I think it's because, on a micro level, our senses betray us constantly in everyday life.
That's a very good point.
Think about visual illusions. You look at a straight stick halfway submerged in a glass of water, and the refraction of light makes it look broken.
Yes.
Your eyes are literally feeding you false information about the physical geometry of the stick.
Or consider the physiological reality of dreams, which Descartes himself heavily relied upon for his method of doubt.
Oh, the dream argument.
Right. When you are immersed in a vivid REM cycle dream, the neurological experience is indistinguishable from waking life.
It feels completely real.
You feel the genuine physical sensation of falling, your heart rate spikes with real terror, you feel the texture of objects. The simulation running inside your sleeping brain is convincing enough to fool your conscious mind entirely.
Wow.
It is only after you cross the threshold into waking life that you retrospectively categorize the experience as an illusion.
Which opens up a terrifying logical loop if you think about it. If dreams are completely indistinguishable from waking life while we are inside them, well, how do you know for an absolute verifiable fact that you are not currently in a dream state?
You don't.
How do you know you are awake right now, listening to this deep dive, and not just generating this entire narrative in your sleep?
You are tapping directly into the core engine of philosophical skepticism there. And we really need to clarify what that term actually means because it has been, well, degraded in modern language.
Oh, definitely. People hear skeptic and think cynic.
Right. Philosophical skepticism isn't about being a contrarian on the internet or distrusting the news cycle or harboring a negative attitude towards society. It is a rigorous, demanding, open-minded testing of our fundamental beliefs.
It's like an aggressive auditing of your brain's accounting books. You are demanding to see the receipts for every single thing you claim to know.
That is a perfect framework.
Yeah.
Now, a true philosophical skeptic doesn't just walk into a room and boldly declare, "I know nothing."
Because that's a paradox, right?
Exactly. Logically, making the definitive statement, "I know nothing," is a self-defeating paradox. Because if you know that you know nothing, well, you possess at least one piece of concrete knowledge.
Which contradicts your own premise.
Exactly. Instead, the philosophical skeptic challenges our claims to knowledge. They shift the burden of proof. You claim you know there is a physical coffee cup on the desk in front of you.
I see it right here.
Prove it, the skeptic says, taking into full account the fact that your sensory perception has undeniably hallucinated coffee cups in your dreams before.
So Descartes had to push this skepticism to its absolute limit. Because if you just say, I might be dreaming, well, even in a dream, 2 + 2 still equals 4.
Right.
A square still has 4 sides in a dream. So he needed an adversary, more powerful than just a sleepy brain, to doubt basic logic and mathematics.
He did. Descartes didn't have the conceptual vocabulary of supercomputers or malevolent neuroscientists, obviously. So he utilized the theology and mythology of the 17th century.
The evil demon.
Yes. He conceptualized the malin génie, a supremely powerful, exceedingly cunning, and entirely evil demon. Descartes hypothesized, what if this demon is dedicating all of its immense supernatural reality-bending energy solely to deceiving me?
Just constantly messing with his mind.
What if every time I add 2 and 2 together, the demon subtly manipulates my mind so I arrive at 4, when the real answer is something else entirely?
It is a state of absolute suffocating paranoia. We are drowning in a sea of Cartesian doubt.
We really are.
We are surrounded by evil demons manipulating our math. We are floating in vats run by supercomputers feeding us fake coffee cups. And the external world is a void. So how do we find solid ground? How does anyone escape the vat once they realize they might be in it?
This is the critical turning point in Descartes' meditations, where he pulls out his ultimate epistemological lifeline.
Okay.
Amidst the complete wreckage of all his former beliefs, having systematically bulldozed the earth, the sky, his memories, and even his own physical body into the realm of doubt, he stumbled upon one tiny, irreducible speck of certainty.
The famous cogito.
Yes. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am.
Right.
Descartes realized that the very mechanism of the demon's deception required a victim. Even if a supremely powerful evil demon is deceiving him about absolutely everything, there intrinsically must be an I that is experiencing the deception.
If an illusion is happening, there has to be an audience watching the illusion.
Precisely.
You can't have a magic trick without someone being tricked.
Exactly, the logic. The act of doubting your own existence requires a doubter. You cannot engage in the act of doubt if you do not exist to perform the action.
Right.
Therefore, the mere fact that he was experiencing thoughts, even if the content of those thoughts was entirely false, manipulated, or simulated, proved definitively that he existed as a thinking entity.
Okay, I followed that logic when I read the source, but it brought up a terrifying caveat that I honestly hadn't fully grasped before.
What's that?
Yes, Descartes proved that the I exists. But if you look closely at what that I actually is, well, it's completely devoid of any recognizable human characteristics.
Ah, yes. It strips your identity down to the absolute metaphysical minimum.
Right, because you think you are you. You think your identity is tied to your childhood memories, your career, your relationships, the face you see in the mirror.
Of course.
But if you strip away everything the demon could potentially be simulating, which is all physical matter and all historical memory, you don't have a life story. You don't have a body. You are nothing but a thinking thing.
A completely featureless point of consciousness.
Floating in a dark void, experiencing thoughts. That isn't exactly a warm, comforting blanket to wrap yourself in. It's proof of existence, but it's an incredibly bleak, austere existence.
It is a remarkably austere foundation, though, it is worth noting historically that while Descartes gets the credit for formalizing this, the foundational logic predates him by over a millennium.
Wait, really? Who said it first?
The texts indicate that in the early 5th century, St. Augustine wrote that a person can doubt absolutely everything in the universe except the fundamental fact that they are doubting. So this seed of the cogito is actually an ancient human realization.
Okay, so Descartes gives us the bare minimum cogito. I exist as a floating mind. But let's jump back to Hilary Putnam, the architect of the modern brain, in a vat scenario.
Okay.
How did Putnam try to defeat his own thought experiment? Because he didn't rely on Descartes' cogito.
No, Putnam took a radically different, highly technical approach. He attempted to dismantle his own scenario using a framework called the causal theory of meaning.
The causal theory of meaning.
Yes, it requires us to step away from metaphysics for a moment and look deeply into linguistics and semantics. How do the words we use actually attach to the world?
Okay, let's unpack this carefully, because the linguistic philosophy in the sources is, frankly, incredibly dense. How does Putnam argue that the vat scenario defeats itself?
Putnam argued that the entire concept of the brain in a vat is fundamentally incoherent from the inside.
Incoherent how?
He claimed that for our words to possess actual referential meaning, they must have a direct causal connection to things in the real physical world. Consider how a child learns a word.
Like learning what a tree is.
Exactly. They point at a large, leafy, physical object in the yard, and a parent says, tree. There is a chain of physical causality.
Light bouncing off the bark entering the eye.
Right, and the sound waves of the parent's voice. That permanently links the mental concept of tree to the physical reality of a tree.
So my word tree means a real tree, because my brain has physically interacted with the reality of trees. I'm following so far.
Now, apply this to a brain that has always been floating in a vat since the moment of its creation.
Okay.
It has never, ever interacted with a real physical vat. It has never interacted with a real physical brain.
Right, it's just in the liquid.
It has only ever interacted with the supercomputer's simulated electrical representations of vats and brains.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
Therefore, Putnam argues, when the brain in the vat forms the thought or says the phrase, I am a brain in a vat, it is structurally incapable of referring to a real physical brain or a real physical vat.
Because it doesn't have the causal link.
Exactly. Its words can only refer to the computer's simulation of a brain in a vat. So if a brain is actually in a vat, its statement, I am a brain in a vat, is necessarily false or entirely meaningless because the words lack the required causal chain to the real external objects. It's referring to virtual objects.
So what does this all mean for us? Because I am going to push back incredibly hard on Putnam right here.
Go for it.
Reading that argument felt like watching a highly paid lawyer walk into a courtroom and get a confessed murderer off the hook because of a typo in the police paperwork. It feels like a purely semantic trick.
Many philosophers share your exact frustration. It reads like a linguistic victory rather than an epistemological one.
Right. Sure, let's grant Putnam his premise. Let's say he won the argument in the realm of semantics. Maybe the brain physically cannot meaningfully say or think the exact words, I am a brain in a vat, with proper real-world reference. But does that actually help the brain know the true nature of reality? Does it change the horrifying physical fact that the biological brain is still trapped in a glass jar being fed a universe of lies by a supercomputer?
No, it doesn't.
I don't care if my vocabulary is causally disconnected, I'm still stuck in the nutrient liquid. It feels like a massive linguistic loophole that completely ignores the actual philosophical terror we are trying to escape.
That is the most devastating critique of Putnam's escape attempt. Putnam successfully proves that the state of being a brain in a vat is largely invisible and unutterable from the inside of the simulation.
Yeah.
But you are entirely correct. It does not actually guarantee that we are walking around in a physical world. It doesn't secure our knowledge of the external environment. We might not be able to meaningfully say we are in a vat, but we could still very much be in one.
So Putnam's semantic trick doesn't actually rescue us. We are still stuck behind the barrier of our own senses.
Yes, we are.
Since we cannot definitively mathematically prove that the outside world exists exactly as we perceive it, we are forced to figure out what happens in the space between our eyes and the real world. We have to ask, what is the actual relationship between our internal perception and the external architecture of reality? What is actually out there?
And that transition brings us face to face with a major conceptual framework in the source text, the veil of perception.
Yes, the veil of perception. The deeply unsettling idea that human beings never, ever actually see the real world directly.
Never.
We are permanently trapped behind a biological veil, only ever interacting with the internal images and sensations our mind projects on the inside of our skull based on sensory data.
It's an isolating thought.
It is. And this brings in the English philosopher John Locke, who tried to build a reliable bridge across this veil by distinguishing between what he called primary and secondary qualities of objects.
Locke's distinction is a crucial attempt to save empirical science from total skepticism. Let's break down the mechanics using the tomato example from the texts.
Perfect. So listener, picture a perfectly ripe tomato sitting on your kitchen counter. If you turn on a bright, modern fluorescent kitchen light, that tomato looks like a vibrant, aggressive, bright red.
Right.
But if you turn off all the lights in the house and just let a faint sliver of moonlight through the window, that exact same tomato might look dark gray or even completely black.
It changes completely.
So the obvious question is, what color is the tomato really?
Yeah.
Locke would argue that the redness doesn't actually exist inside the physical tissue of the tomato itself.
Color is a secondary quality.
Exactly. It depends entirely on the observer, the environmental lighting conditions, and the specific biological way human retinas and optical nerves process electromagnetic light waves.
If a creature with completely different ocular biology looked at it, or if you change the light, the color changes. Therefore, taste, smell, color, sound, the feeling of warmth, these are all secondary qualities.
They only exist in our minds.
Yes. They are purely subjective experiences generated entirely within the theater of your mind. They do not exist out there in the universe.
But, and this is where Locke tries to save reality, whether the kitchen lights are on or off, whether you're looking at it or not, the tomato is still a three-dimensional sphere.
Correct.
It still occupies a highly specific amount of spatial volume. It still possesses a certain atomic mass. Its physical extension, its shape, its state of motion or rest, these are what Locke called primary qualities.
These are actual objective mathematical features of the physical object that exist completely independent of any human being perceiving them.
As we connect this to the bigger picture of human progress, the entire enterprise of modern science largely deals with these primary qualities. Physics, chemistry, orbital mechanics, they measure mass, velocity, spatial dimensions, atomic structures.
They do not have instruments that can measure the subjective internal experience of redness or the smell of rain.
And for a long time, philosophers relied on Locke's primary qualities as our best defense against the vat. Because even if our unreliable senses fabricate the colors and the sounds, the primary qualities suggest there is a hard, persistent, objective physical reality out there causing those internal perceptions.
But philosophy refuses to let us rest easy.
Naturally.
You read Locke and think, great, the physical world is safe. But then the source text introduces a radical, almost violently counterintuitive perspective to Locke's comfortable physics.
George Berkeley.
Yes, the philosophy of George Berkeley, specifically his brand of subjective idealism, his entire worldview is summed up in his famous Latin maxim, esse est percipi.
To be is to be perceived.
Exactly. Berkeley didn't just disagree with Locke, he took a sledgehammer to the very foundation of primary qualities. Berkeley argued that Locke's division is completely artificial and logically impossible.
How so?
Try this mental exercise. Attempt to conceive of an object's physical shape or size, a primary quality, without also simultaneously imagining it possessing a color or a texture or some other secondary quality.
I can't.
Try it.
No, if I try to picture a sphere, I have to picture a gray sphere, or a transparent glassy sphere, or a black outline of a sphere against a white background. It has to have some visual quality to distinguish its borders from the empty space around it.
Precisely the point. You cannot strip an object of its secondary mind-dependent qualities and be left with a naked, invisible primary quality.
Okay, that makes sense.
Therefore, Berkeley concluded with ruthless logic, if primary qualities are inextricably bound to secondary qualities and secondary qualities exist only in the mind, well, then primary qualities must also exist only in the mind.
Whoa.
The inevitable conclusion of Berkeley's idealism is that matter, physical, mind-independent substance, simply does not exist. The universe is not made of atoms. It is made only of minds and the ideas perceived by those minds.
Here is where my brain starts to genuinely hurt, but also where it gets incredibly fascinating. Let me test this framework with a practical scenario.
Sure.
If Berkeley demands that existence requires an active observer, that an object literally only exists while it is being perceived by a mind, does my physical living room cease to exist the absolute second I walk out the door and turn off the light?
It's a great question.
Like if my dog isn't in there and I'm not in there, does the couch simply vanish into a metaphysical void, only to instantly pop back into existence the moment I open the door again?
It is the ultimate escalation of the if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it problem.
Right.
If existence is perception, unperceived things cannot exist.
Yeah.
But Berkeley was a bishop, and he had an incredibly elegant, if somewhat mind-bending, ontological solution to prevent the universe from blinking in and out of existence every time someone blinked their eyes.
And what was that?
His solution was God.
Ah, God is the ultimate universal security camera.
That's a very modern way to phrase it, but structurally accurate.
Yeah.
Because God is the ultimate, omnipresent, infinite perceiver. God is constantly observing every single coordinate of the universe simultaneously.
She's always watching the couch.
Exactly. Therefore, every single idea remains constantly held within the mind of God. When you leave your living room, the couch does not blip out of existence, not because it is made of physical wood and fabric, but because God is still actively perceiving it.
That's whole.
God guarantees the continuity, the stability, and the apparent physical laws of the universe when our finite human minds are turned away.
It's a brilliant philosophical workaround. It keeps the world feeling solid and predictable, but fundamentally re-architects the universe to be entirely mental. No physical matter is required at all, just a divine mind sustaining the simulation.
But whether we side with Locke's world of atoms and primary qualities or Berkeley's world of divine ideas, we run into a massive structural problem with how we view the mechanism of our own minds.
The Cartesian theater.
Yes. Our source text brings up a critique formulated by Daniel Dennett using a somewhat derogatory term, the Cartesian theater. It is a devastating critique of how Descartes, Locke, and intuitively most of us today model human consciousness. We naturally imagine the mind as a sort of internal, private stage or movie theater.
Right. I think most people intuitively feel this way. You imagine your physical eyes act like camera lenses, projecting a live video feed onto a metaphorical movie screen located somewhere deep inside your brain.
Yeah, sitting back watching the show.
And sitting in the front row of this dark little theater inside your skull is the real you. An inner observer, a homunculus, or an immaterial soul, just sitting in a chair, watching the sensory ideas go by on the screen and making decisions based on the movie.
It feels viscerally correct to us. It feels exactly like we are situated somewhere behind our eyes, looking out through them like windows. But logically and mechanically, it is an absolute disaster.
Because it triggers the trap of infinite regress.
Exactly. Let's trace the logic. If there is a little inner observer inside your head sitting in a theater watching the screen of your perceptions, well, how does that specific inner observer see the screen? Does the little man in your head possess an even smaller set of eyes, projecting an image to an even smaller movie screen, watched by an even smaller man inside his head?
And does that microscopic man have an even smaller man?
It creates an infinite, endless loop of smaller and smaller internal observers that completely fails to explain how consciousness actually functions.
It's like pointing a video camera directly at the television screen, displaying the camera's feed. You just get an infinite tunnel of screens receding forever into the dark. It explains nothing.
Nothing at all.
And all this relentless talk of inner observers, immaterial souls, and disembodied brains floating in vats forces us to confront the absolute biggest, most intractable mystery of all. Science has achieved miraculous things. We have mapped the cosmic microwave background of the universe. We have split the atom. We can manipulate genetic code.
Astounding.
But the one thing science cannot fully explain is the very instrument that is doing the mapping and the splitting, the subjective human mind itself.
You are describing what the philosopher David Chalmers famously coined as the hard problem of consciousness.
It highlights this brutal clash between the subjective, entirely private nature of our thoughts and desires and the objective, third-person, measurable world of physical science.
They seem fundamentally incompatible.
Science is unbelievably good at quantifying things. You can measure velocity, mass, the exact electrical voltage of a neuron firing. But how do you put a feeling of nostalgia on a scale and weigh it? How do you measure the exact spatial dimensions of the color red as I experience it privately inside my mind? You physically can't.
And this brings us squarely into the treacherous territory of the mind-body problem. The question is this: how do purely mental subjective phenomena, your private thoughts, your abstract beliefs, The raw, agonizing sensation of physical pain arises from a purely physical, squishy gray mass of biological tissue.
Right.
Descartes' answer to this was what we call substance dualism. He explicitly elevated the mind to a completely different category of existence, a completely separate substance from the physical body. He argued there is physical stuff, res extensa, which has mass and takes up space, and there is mental stuff, res cogitans, which has no physical dimensions whatsoever.
But creating two completely different types of universe stuff creates a massive, perhaps insurmountable logistical nightmare. It's called the interaction problem.
Yes, the interaction problem.
I want to build a modern analogy to illustrate just how broken this is to the listener. Imagine someone trying to convince you that a piece of software, which has no physical mass, it's just conceptual code, can somehow reach out of a computer monitor and physically, manually turn the metal gears of a clock.
It's absurd.
If I am sitting here and I feel thirsty, thirst is a purely mental state, a desire, right? My physical, biological hand reaches out, grabs a heavy glass of water, and physically lifts it to my mouth.
The mind causing a physical action.
Or, conversely, if I step on a sharp physical thumbtack with my physical foot, my nervous system sends physical electrical signals to my brain, and I suddenly experience a non-physical rush of pain, which is a purely mental state.
The physical world clearly impacts the mental world, and the mental world clearly directs the physical world. They interact constantly.
Right. But here is the fatal rub for dualism. A fundamental, foundational law of our physical universe is that physical effects require physical causes. The conservation of energy. If a physical bowling ball moves, it's because another physical object transferred kinetic energy to it. So how on earth can a completely non-physical mind, something with zero mass, zero energy, and zero spatial coordinates, reach into the physical universe and exert force to push my physical arm to lift a glass? Where does the non-physical ghost actually grip the physical machine?
That is the metaphysical chasm Descartes dug for himself. By splitting the universe into two entirely incompatible, non-overlapping domains, he made interaction logically impossible.
He painted himself into a corner.
Decades later, the philosopher Gilbert Ryle viciously mocked Cartesian dualism in his 1949 work, famously dismissing it as the ghost in the machine dogma.
The ghost in the machine.
Ryle argued that viewing the mind as a separate, invisible, ghostly entity pulling the biological levers of the physical body was a massive category mistake. It fundamentally misunderstood how language and biology operate.
And what's wild is that Descartes was so backed into a corner by this very obvious interaction problem that he basically panicked. He tried to claim the interaction happened in the pineal gland in the brain, but that didn't solve the physics problem at all.
Not even a little bit.
So later philosophers who followed his dualism had to suggest that God was constantly, actively intervening billions of times a second, just to make the mind and body appear to interact.
Right.
Like God acts as the invisible metaphysical middleman every single time you decide to wiggle your toe. You think wiggle, God sees the thought, and God physically wiggles your toe for you.
That theory is called occasionalism, and it perfectly demonstrates the desperation of philosophers trying to resolve the mind-body problem without abandoning dualism.
Because it's a ridiculous stretch.
If you require continuous, microscopic, divine intervention just to explain reaching for a glass of water, your philosophical framework is likely structurally flawed.
Okay, so if the mind is this deeply isolated, private ghost, trapped either inside the biological machine of the human body, or worse, trapped in a vat on an evil scientist's desk, how can we possibly know that anyone else possesses a mind?
We have arrived at the problem of other minds. It is the most isolating epistemological problem of all.
Yes, because I know, with Cartesian certainty, that I am conscious. I feel the warmth of the sun. I hear my own internal monologue. I feel the anxiety of this deep dive. But I do not, and physically cannot, feel your thoughts.
Right. You have no access to my internal state.
I cannot experience your consciousness. And our sources introduced this wild, profoundly creepy concept called philosophical zombies. And just to be absolutely clear to the listener, we are not talking about Hollywood monsters.
No.
We aren't talking about rotting, brain-eating corpses dragging their feet through an apocalypse.
No, the concept of the philosophical zombie, explored by thinkers like David Chalmers and discussed in our sources by Larry Hauser, is far more insidious.
Insidious.
Think of the perfect androids in science fiction, or the chilling conformity of the Stepford Wives. A philosophical zombie is an entity that physically, biologically, and behaviorally acts Exactly. Flawlessly, like a normal, conscious human being.
Do they look perfectly normal?
Exactly. If you tell a zombie a joke, it will process the auditory information, its facial muscles will contract into a smile, and it will emit a laugh. If you poke a zombie with a hot needle, its nociceptors will fire, it will yell, "Ouch!" and it will quickly pull its arm away.
But inside.
On the subjective level, there's absolutely zero conscious inner life. The biological lights are on, the machinery is running perfectly, but nobody is home to experience it.
That is terrifying.
There is no subjective feeling of pain, no quality of redness. It is all dark inside.
They are essentially unfathomably complex biological algorithms. Just meat robots. So because I, as a human being, only ever have access to observing behavior, because all I can see is you nodding your head or hear the sound waves of your voice forming coherent sentences, I have zero direct empirical access to your private subjective experience.
You can't see inside my mind.
I can't look inside your consciousness. So how do I, or how does a listener sitting at home right now, know that I'm not just a highly programmed, non-conscious linguistic zombie? How do I know the expert sitting across from me isn't the zombie generating appropriate responses without any actual inner life?
The terrifying truth is that you don't. Not with the absolute mathematical certainty that Descartes demanded. You only ever witness the behavioral and linguistic output of the people around you. You use an argument from analogy.
An argument from analogy.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know you have an inner life, you see others acting like you, so you assume they have an inner life too. But it is an assumption.
Wow.
You cannot definitively prove that the entire global population isn't composed of philosophical zombies, leaving you as the sole conscious entity in a dead universe.
Which is the definition of solipsism, and it is a terrifying place to leave your mind. I could be the only actually conscious being in a universe populated entirely by elaborate biological fakes. But this is exactly where the source material deploys a crucial intellectual tool to act as a savior, keeping us from spiraling into total paranoid solipsism.
And what's that?
The principle of Occam's razor.
Yes, Occam's razor, also known formally in philosophy as the principle of parsimony.
Right.
It is a heuristic, a problem-solving principle attributed to the 14th century logician William of Occam. Simply stated, it dictates that when you are presented with multiple competing hypotheses that explain the exact same phenomenon, the simplest explanation is usually the most likely to be true.
Specifically, the explanation that requires postulating the fewest number of unproven entities or complex assumptions.
Exactly.
In layman's terms, don't massively overcomplicate your theories unless the evidence absolutely forces you to.
That's a good way to put it. So let's take Occam's razor and surgically apply it to the massive problems we've discussed today. Let's start with the brain in a vat.
Okay, let's do it.
We have two competing scenarios that explain your current sensory experience perfectly. Scenario A. There is a real, persistent physical world made of atoms that exists roughly in the way your senses perceive it.
Normal reality.
Or Scenario B. The physical world you perceive is fake, but there is still a real physical world out there containing an evil scientist who requires an impossibly complex vat life support system, plus a supercomputer of unimaginable processing power, plus a flawless, bug-free software program capable of generating a universe of physics and history perfectly.
Right. Scenario B requires a mountainous, towering stack of wild science fiction assumptions just to explain why I am currently looking at a coffee cup. Scenario A just requires the physical universe to roughly be what it appears to be. Occam's razor looks at that and says, obviously, bet on the real world, it requires infinitely fewer assumptions.
Now apply the razor to the terrifying problem of other minds. To genuinely assume that you are the sole conscious being and every single other human on Earth is a hollow philosophical zombie requires a breathtakingly massive assumption.
What assumption?
That you are entirely, magically, biologically unique in the cosmos. That despite every other human having the exact same carbon-based biology, the exact same neural pathways, and the exact same evolutionary history as you, only your specific brain miraculously secretes the magic juice of consciousness, while billions of identical brains do not.
Statistically and biologically speaking, that is an incredibly arrogant and unwarranted assumption.
It is entirely unparsimonious, it is much, much simpler, and requires far fewer theoretical leaps to assume that since other people look like you physically, are built of the same biological material, and react to stimuli exactly as you do, the underlying mechanism producing that behavior consciousness is the same as yours.
So Occam's razor effectively sweeps away the zombies and destroys the vat. We can finally breathe.
Well, I have to offer a strict philosophical caveat here. Occam's razor is incredibly powerful, but It sweeps away the problem practically. It allows us to get on with our daily lives, form relationships, and build societies without treating everyone like a deceptive robot or living in paralyzing fear of the evil scientist.
Right, but philosophically.
Philosophically, in the realm of absolute truth, it only displaces the problem. Occam's razor does not definitively solve the epistemology. It merely says, scenario A is overwhelmingly more likely and mathematically elegant. It absolutely does not say scenario A is mathematically proven. The shadow of the vat remains.
That is a fair, if somewhat deflating distinction. It's a pragmatic tool for loading, not a logical proof of reality. Okay, I want to take this entire framework and flip it completely on its head.
Let's do it.
Let's completely reverse the premise of the brain in the vat. What if you aren't the tragic victim of a malevolent scientist? What if you are being held hostage in the dark? What if you eagerly, willingly volunteered to enter the vat?
This brings us to a brilliant, highly influential thought experiment introduced by the American philosopher Robert Nozick.
Okay.
He presented this in his 1974 book, Anarchy, State, and Utopia. He called it the experience machine.
This one really stuck with me because it challenges human nature so directly.
Mhm.
Okay, listener, I want you to imagine a machine. But this machine wasn't built by a sadist. It was built by entirely benevolent, hyper-advanced neuropsychologists.
Benevolent scientists this time.
Exactly. This machine has the capacity to perfectly stimulate your brain to give you any subjective experience you could ever possibly desire.
Anything at all.
You want to feel the pride of writing a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. The machine will simulate the exact, exhausting exhilaration of writing every word, the smell of the paper, the applause of the crowd. You want to experience falling deeply, passionately in love without the risk of heartbreak. You will feel the dopamine and oxytocin perfectly.
It sounds incredible.
You float in a comfortable tank with safe electrodes attached to your brain. You pre-program your life's exact desires on a menu before you go in, and you experience a flawless, curated, simulated reality for the rest of your natural life.
And the crucial mechanism here is that while you are floating inside the tank experiencing these programmed joys, you will have absolutely no memory that you are inside a machine. To your conscious mind, the simulation will feel 100% authentic and real.
So here is the profound dilemma, and I am asking you, the listener, to answer this honestly in your own head right now. Would you plug into this experience machine for the rest of your life? If you could guarantee a life of zero suffering, zero tragic accidents, zero grief, and maximum unbroken joy and achievement, would you sign the paper and get in the vat?
Nozick confidently argues that if people deeply introspect and are truly honest with themselves, the vast majority would unequivocally say, no, I will not plug in.
Which is wild when you think about it. Human biology and psychology are fundamentally driven by hedonism. We spend our entire waking lives desperately chasing pleasure, seeking comfort, and avoiding pain, stress, and trauma. So when we are offered the ultimate infallible pleasure machine, why is our instinct to reject it?
Because, Nozick explains, rejecting the machine reveals a deep hidden truth about human values.
Oh, what's that?
Subjective, internal pleasure is not our only metric for a valuable life. There is something inherently, objectively valuable to us beyond just the feeling of an experience.
Yeah.
We don't just want the neurological feeling of having written a great novel. We want to have actually engaged with reality and written it.
Right.
We don't just want the simulated chemical rush of being a good, heroic person. We want to actually be a certain way in the real world. We possess a fundamental, overriding desire to have contact with genuine, unfiltered reality, even if that reality inevitably includes suffering, failure, boredom, and pain.
We crave authenticity over simulated perfection. It's the difference between spending months physically training, suffering in the freezing cold, and risking your life to actually summit Mount Everest, versus just putting on a highly advanced VR headset in your warm living room that visually makes you feel like you are on Everest.
Exactly. The struggle, the risk of failure, the actual interaction with the physical mountain, that is where the value is generated, not just in the visual reward.
It completely upends pure utilitarianism and hedonism. It proves that human beings value truth, physical actualization, and real-world consequences, not just a continuous drip of digital dopamine.
But engaging with the idea of plugging our brains into machines forces us into one final, incredibly thorny philosophical thicket.
Oh boy.
If we can separate our experiences from our physical bodies, we have to talk about personal identity. Who or what exactly is the you that is making the choice to plug in or stay out?
This is the central debate over the hardware versus software of the human mind. Is your continuous personal identity tied entirely to your physical, biological body, your specific carbon-based brain mass, the hardware? Or is your identity merely the abstract collection of your memories, your learned beliefs, your personality quirks, the narrative of your experiences, the software?
To vividly illustrate how messy this gets, our sources rely on the teletransporter thought experiment,
Cool.
which is classic mind-bending sci-fi
I
philosophy.
love this one.
Imagine a teleporter, exactly like the ones in Star Trek. You need to travel from London to a colony on the moon. You step into a glass booth in London. The machine meticulously scans every single microscopic atom in your body, mapping the exact neural pathways of your brain.
Okay, scanning me perfectly.
It then instantaneously destroys your physical body in London, vaporizing the hardware. It beams the digital data of your structure to a receiving booth on the moon. The moon receiver gathers new, local atoms from its environment and reconstructs you perfectly based on the data. You step out on the moon. You have the exact same memories of your childhood, the exact same fear of spiders, the exact same physical scar on your left knee. Is the person who steps out of the booth on the moon actually you?
If you lean toward the software theory of identity, which relies on psychological continuity, most people would confidently say yes. The biological hardware was entirely swapped out, but the software, the pattern of memories and personality remained identical and unbroken. You survived the trip.
But wait, let's tweak the machinery to show how fragile that logic is.
Oh no.
What if the machine in London scans you, sends the flawless data stream to the moon, but experiences a mechanical glitch and fails to vaporize your original body in London?
So I'm still there.
So now the original you steps out of the booth in London perfectly intact, while a physically and psychologically identical copy steps out of the receiver on the moon simultaneously. Which one is the real you? If your bank account only has enough money for one person who legally owns it.
This paradox forces a radical reevaluation of how we view the self. Asking questions like, where did my true soul go? Or which specific body contains the real me becomes entirely meaningless if we continue to erroneously view the self as a concrete, singular, indivisible thing.
Right, because there isn't some magical growing orb of identity, a soul token, that can logically only reside in one physical location at a time.
Precisely. If we rigorously apply the software lens, your continuous psychological history has simply physically diverged. Up until the exact moment the teleportation button was pressed, there was one singular stream of consciousness. Following the glitch, there are now two distinct branching streams.
You survived both of them.
Yes, both the person walking the streets of London and the person looking at the Earth from the moon have an absolutely equal, mathematically identical claim to your past memories. But moving forward for that second, they immediately become two completely separate, distinct individuals because their ongoing sensory experiences will differ.
The concept of you is entirely fluid. It is not a rigid physical object stored in a vault. It is a continuing, evolving process.
That is deeply unsettling, the idea that identity can fork like a path in the woods, but it's also strangely liberating. Your identity isn't a locked box. It's a continuous river that can split, and both rivers are equally real.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. Okay, let's take a deep breath and systematically summarize the incredible reality-bending odyssey we've been on today.
Sounds good.
We started out visualizing ourselves trapped in a dark vat by a malevolent scientist, completely doubting our very existence alongside Descartes and his reality-warping evil demon.
We questioned everything.
We scraped the bottom of the epistemological barrel and found one tiny, indestructible speck of certainty with the cogito I think, therefore I am. We attempted to peek behind Locke's veil of perception, grappling with the fact that colors and tastes exist nowhere except inside the dark theater of our minds.
While Berkeley pushed us to the edge by arguing that the entire physical universe is nothing but an immaterial idea sustained by the mind of God.
Yes. We faced down the deeply isolating terror of philosophical zombies, using Occam's razor to bravely, practically assume we aren't completely alone in a universe of meat robots. And ultimately, we stared deeply into Nozick's experience machine and challenged our own nature, asking ourselves if we would willingly trade the friction of messy, painful reality for a life of flawless, simulated perfection.
It has been a profound, exhaustive odyssey through the deepest waters of epistemology and metaphysics, and I want to leave the listener with a final, lingering thought.
Please do.
This is something that wasn't explicitly spelled out in the historical 17th century texts, but it builds directly, unavoidably on everything we've meticulously dismantled today.
Okay, I'm ready.
We have spent this entire deep dive worrying if a supernatural demon or a fictional evil scientist forcibly kidnapped us and shoved us into a vat against our will. We feared the loss of our autonomy. But look closely at the trajectory of our actual world today. Look at the rapid, unstoppable rise of fully immersive virtual reality headsets. Look at incredibly convincing AI-generated environments, algorithms designed to predict our desires, and artificial relationships replacing human connection. Look at our modern, inescapable obsession with glowing screens, infinite scrolling, and curated digital dopamine loops that isolate us from the physical world.
Wow.
Are we not, piece by piece, line of code by line of code, eagerly and enthusiastically building the experience machine for ourselves?
Oh, wow. We aren't being forced into the vat. We are pre-ordering it.
Perhaps the real existential threat isn't an external evil scientist capturing our brains in the middle of the night. Perhaps we are the evil scientists of our own reality. Slowly, willingly, we are volunteering to become the brains in the vat, enthusiastically trading the difficult, painful, authentic physical world for a comfortable, frictionless, endlessly entertaining digital simulation. We're locking ourselves inside the Cartesian theater and throwing away the key.
Are we willingly plugging ourselves in? That is an incredibly haunting, immediate thought to end on. I'm going to be staring at my smartphone very, very differently today.
I think we all will.
We are going to leave you to ponder that one on your own as you navigate whatever reality you happen to find yourself in. Don't forget to follow us and subscribe to stay updated on our latest episodes and never miss a step in this odyssey of thought. Until next time, keep questioning.